I saw an ad for a 1994 Suzuki quad two-wheel drive down at Bordertown, which is 300 kilometres away. I went and got it. It looks like a pile of junk in the truck. Cost me 300 bucks. Before I do anything with this new Chook shed barn find, I just want to show you the condition things, some of the things they're in. This engine has the cylinder head missing, but I believe it's in other boxes, and the fellow was going to use this engine to replace the engine in the 94 quad bike frame, because the original engine in the 94 quad bike frame has well, all I can see, it's got a bent conrod, and the cylinder head's also missing on it completely, and I think it's been chucked away because, well, the sleeve at least and pistons all been chucked away because it was damaged. I think the actual head and cam itself are in boxes somewhere. But look, this crank appears just, it hasn't got any noticeable end play in it. I found I think the point of this video is just to show the condition before I start trying to clean anything. I'll just try and roll it around here a little bit so that the lighting may be better. You see it's got control cables attached to it for reverse and the gear shift and the high and low. This is just a, it's not a four-wheel drive version, but basically the same crankcase as the four-wheel drive version. It's just missing the forward universal joints. Now, as I come around this side, and we've got this shading problem, I believe this exhaust is off the earlier 88 style model, and I found a carburetor in a box that looked like the 88 carburetor, and so I'm guessing this motor may well be out of an 88 or 89 model. I'm guessing that exhaust is one of the differences, but otherwise I think the casting is the same. Now, so the recoil starter's on there. One thing I noticed when I was picking it up is that these uni joints feel real good. No play in either of those, so that's a real win, because that's something I had to fix on my other. Now, this motor was cut out of the frame, and the frame that's in, I've got that frame, and all the bottom of the frame's been cut away. Looks like it's got a good selection of the hoses on there. One thing I picked up on fairly early looking at it is there's a chunk missing out of this case where the starter motor fits in, which may mean that I don't use this crankcase at all, and hopefully the crankcase on the original one's okay. Depends on what sort of internal damage I pick up on with it. It may also be rooted, in which case I may need to somehow come up with a repair for this area on this one. But otherwise, first inspection, it's not too bad, and I think I've got something to work with. I'm certainly going to start now cleaning it down with compressed air and a wire brush, get rid of that exhaust, and start taking the cables off it and all the peripheral items that will come off, because I'm going to do a complete dismantle of this, including splitting the crankcase so that I can remove the crankshaft. So lots to do. I'm going to make a start. It's mainly cleaning first before I open it up anymore. Okay, I'm going to take these cables off, the recoil starter off, wiring where I can get it off hoses. I'll knock these, you pull these uni joints out and come back to you once I've done that. Okay, I've stripped a few bits off this. Starting from the back there, I've got the uni joint off. Down there, I've taken the speedo drive off. I've taken some hoses that were wrapped around this side away. I've got it sitting up on a oil drain pan. I think the oil had been largely drained out of it. I've tied some of these cables up loosely just to keep the neutral switch and the reversing switch and the stator wiring organised so that it doesn't get caught on things. All the screws I've taken out, I've tried to sort of put back in the position they came from so that I don't lose track of that. I've removed the starter, recoil starter. I'll go back and show you. This is the position that there's a piece broken out here where the starter motor fits in this corrosion that was underneath the old starter motor. I've taken the linkages off from the reverse and the gear shift and the sub-trans gear shift positions. I've got the uni joint off here. I've removed rubber mounts that were cut off and in this top section, and I don't know whether you can see down in there, that's the strainer cover I've removed, and I haven't been able to take the main oil drain plug out the bottom as yet because it's got quite a big burr on it. I think it's a 17mm nut and it's burred over, so my socket didn't fit it. I think I need to go back to it when I can turn the bike up and the motor upside down and give that nut a bit of a file, and so I can release that. Timing chain hanging down here, and I've got a rag blocking the cylinder. Overall, I've found it pretty good so far. Certain things are better than I expected. I haven't found anything except for this that I'm particularly disappointed in. That may mean that when I dismantle the other one, I've got to completely dismantle it and swap the crankcases over if the other one's undamaged. Otherwise, try and repair this, and the repairing that may not be a huge problem. Once the starter motor is plugged in, I might be able to fabricate something up there. It's only really a cover. I suspect it broke out when they were removing the starter motor that caused all that corrosion. So I've just been using compressed air and a screwdriver to flip around all these little corners that catch dirt, as you can see, like that. And I think most of the farm material is sandy, so I don't think there's been a lot of corrosion happen underneath it, and so things start to look a bit better once they get cleaned up a little bit. So I'll move on from this. I'm trying to decide whether I remove the transmission side or the clutch side next, but I'll have some lunch and think about that. Okay, I've decided I'm going to take the flywheel side off first, where the transfer case gears are, and so I've got it tilted up like that. A fair bit of oil ended up running out of it, even though there didn't appear to be much in it initially. It finds its way to the bottom. So I've given that case a minor clean, knocking some of the sand off. It's obviously not spotless, but I need to remove this recoil starter cup and a number of screws around that cover and give it a knock off. That's what I'm going to do. I'll come back to you after I've done that. Okay, that's the cover off. Now, these bearings have come out. They actually could have stayed in the case or come out on the shaft. They are a really neat fit on there. I've just lifted that up, and you know, I need to wiggle it to get it to go down again. In fact, you know, it's binding there a little bit, and that one's the same. It just lifts off. You see there, when they're sitting true, they it's bugging me now. This one's, so there's such a neat fit that, there it is. That's it off. That's got witness marks on the back of it. I don't know whether you can see them, showing that it goes right up against the spline there. And very neat fit on there. And I'm not going to bother now that I've taken it off. I got it to come off and go on before. The issue I had getting this cover off was this dowel pin was binding, and I could release it at everywhere else except this dowel pin, and yet there's a hammering point just here that you'd think would help release that dowel pin, but it wouldn't. That dowel pin's here, and there's a hammering point just there, and there's hammering points at other spots around the edge of the case, one back there, and there's so I could feel it moving everywhere except at this dowel point, and so what to do, because there's nothing close to that to sort of help you, but well, you're hitting it there, it's not making any difference. So I heated this dowel pin from the outside to about 100 degrees Celsius, about the temperature spit tends to sizzle on the casing. No hotter than that, because aluminium doesn't expand much more once it gets to that temperature. And then I poured bolt release stuff down this hole, which is like just there, and it's a blind hole, and so that would have filled up with the bolt release gear I've got. I'll show you what that is that I've been using. It's called Yield. Loosens rust instantly, supposedly. Well, I poured that down through the hole next to this dowel pin, which is this one, and the level perhaps welled up in there, and then it probably, because it was dammed up, it probably ran into that joint a bit more, and so with the heat and the yield, and maybe I heated it, I poured yield into it. The yield may well have sort of sucked up into it when it was cooling. Anyway, eventually it moved, but I probably spent half an hour tapping away in this area trying to get that dowel pin to move prior to that. So that was a good result. I've got all of the, you see there's a shim on that one, and the bearing for that one is here. Now I think that's partially pulled out of the case. Again, I can't just push it back easily, but as long as it's sitting there, I've got the shim for it. There's a shim under this one, and there's no shim on this one. So I've got all those bits. I'm sort of guessing this hasn't been apart. I need to make a puller to pull this off. And looking at the way this gear train works, It is very similar components. That little idler shaft there with the 2 gears on it, and these 2 gears on this shaft, which is the input from the gearbox, are the same size gears, and this drive down here, if this one's driven by the gearbox, the transmission goes from this one to this one to this one via the other gear there down to the big one. If it goes the other way, the little one at the back there on the input shaft drives this big gear directly. Have a look at Andy the mechanic has a video on it. It goes for an hour and a half, and it explains all of this stuff really well, and I learned a lot by re-watching that before I started today. So this is the stator and the pickup so that the CDI box knows when to fire, top dead centre. Everything seems fine in there. That's a little shield that you check that that's bolted down properly. Everything seems fine here. I've lost the gasket. The gasket's hard and torn up around the edges, but that's fine. So look, very pleased. This is a little detent for the, this is the input for switching low and high ranges that this gearbox has. It obviously doesn't have the super low. So this is the flywheel and the magnets for the stator are inside there. That needs to be pulled off the crankshaft, and the correct way of doing it is to have a puller that screws onto these threads here and then pulls on that and pushes on here to pull that flywheel up. Now, to buy a puller in Australia from one of the motocross stores that fits that is $120, and I thought, I'm not spending that on this for a once-off job, and I'll keep looking around. This is the first time I've really needed it. I was thinking I might have needed it on my earlier bikes, but I didn't, so I didn't bother buying one. I made some inquiries about whether anyone around had one that I could borrow, because that's really all you need to use it for a once-off job. Now I'll have 2 of these to do, because I've got the other motor in the 94 bike to pull the crank out of and change over, because it's buggered, and so I need it twice this time. So anyway, I was keeping my eye out, and this is an M38, or it's a metric 38mm thread with a 1.5mm pitch, and I saw on Marketplace a guy selling a tap that's exactly that size. There it is there, M38 by 1.5. So both a tap, he had a tap and a die. I know I don't really need the die that's size, but they're 2 pieces that are nearly brand new, and I got both of them for $25. So I'm going to go to the lathe and see whether I can make a puller that suits this. Now I need a piece of material that's larger than 38mm. It probably could be 50mm or around 2-inch bar, and then it needs to be taller than that, because it needs a thread on the top of it as well. Really needs to be a piece nearly as long as this Allen key, getting up around say 3.5 inches or 90mm or something like that, to with this thread tapped in the end of it. I'm going to not draw that up as such. I'm just going to see how I go. It only needs 5 or 6 threads on it, on the bottom there, and then it needs a sizable thread in the end because it's going to put some pressure down on the end of the crankshaft there to push that off. So I'll come back to you when I've made a start on that. Just for shits and giggles, I tried the die on that thread around on the flywheel, and it's a perfect fit. So the tap's going to be good, and I went hunting for a tap and a bolt to suit the puller end, and I found that M12 bolt. It's a grade 8 bolt with a 1.75mm pitch thread. I could have found a finer pitch bolt, but the important thing was I've got a matching tap and bolt for the other end of the material. Now I've also found a piece of scrap steel. It's already drilled out a little bit in this end. It's a bit too long. I might have to drill up the guts of it and try and part it off or something, just to bring it to a reasonable size. It's also 2.5 inch diameter when I only needed 2 inch, but the extra diameter there doesn't matter, it'll fit inside the flywheel. So I'm going to bore out the centre of that, put a big drill up the guts of it first of all, create a big cavity in there, remembering there's only needs to be teeth on the very end of it, and then spin it around and put a M12 thread in the other end of it after I shorten it down a bit. Okay, I've bored this hole out to just over 35mm, and then up to 38mm clearance behind this lip at the front. The threads only need to go on this lip at the front. I figured about 6mm of thread is all that's on the flywheel, so a few threads on there, which I'm about to go ahead and do. So there's sort of clearance on this side and clearance on that side. This clearance on this side, I'll just give it a bit of a lead in, and we'll see how we go putting some threads on there. I've got the tap here ready to go in. It'll be held with the centre on this end, and then just a shifter on the flats there to hold it steady, a bit of oil on it, and I'll pull it all over by hand, pull the chuck over, rotate the chuck by hand. That's the setup there. I really can't film and do it at the same time. Big shifter laying there on the flats, and I'm just going to pull the chuck around. I can hear it cutting, winding its way in there, but I need the other hand to keep the tension up on the back there. So that's the process. Well, that was a lot harder than I expected. I've got a thread in there now, really only the first 6mm or something, because it was as tough as nails, and it's taken me 30 minutes just to move that in there, basically one flute at a time and backing it off to break the chip. I just don't think that tap's perhaps got the clearance it should have. Anyway, we'll can move on now. This flywheel is on a tapered shaft. It's keyed to a tapered shaft. There's the keyway there, and there's a nut holding it down onto that tapered shaft, which I've removed. And to release this flywheel off that taper, it needs to be pulled, and you can see the threads at the base. They're in shot there. You can see the threads here at the base of that flywheel, and that's what the puller engages with, and when it's on there it can pull this off, and it pulls that off by pushing down on the center of the shaft. So I thought I'd add this little bit to my video as an explanation as to what the puller does. Up inside this lump of steel, it's bigger diameter than it needed to be, but it makes it a nice solid. You can see the threads on the front end of it there. The rest of the hole inside there is just clearance for the nut, and then up at the end there where is a smaller diameter that the bolt screws through. I think I drilled that out to 5/8 or 16mm in old terms, perhaps with the hole right through. You can see there's a 16mm hole at the top of that large cavity, and then at this end that's the M12 thread 1.75 pitch, and it was drilled with a 10.5 inch drill, which was then the tapping size for that bolt. Now there's quite a bit of thread in there. I think I made it at 15 or 18mm of depth of thread there, so that there was plenty of bearing surface on this bolt when it was getting wound in to press down on top of the shaft that came up through here. Now that top of the shaft is fairly small. It's got an M10 thread on it. I wound a nut down on the top of that shaft with a couple of washers under it, which made the nut up level with the end of the shaft, and that nut fitted up inside that 16mm larger bore down the centre there, and it acted as a protector for the end of the crankshaft, and it worked quite effectively in the removal stage. I was quite impressed to see this flywheel when it came off. It's got the sprag clutch on the back there that's used by the starter clutch mechanism, and it seems to be working fine. This whole component really looks brand new, and it's come out of the Chook shed and a pretty crappy looking case, but internals of it seem fine, so something to proceed with. The way this works is that now screws onto that thread like that, right till the bottom's out, and then this bolt is wound down and it presses down on the top of the crankshaft, and because it's pressing down, it has a tendency to pull this up, and it pulls it off the shaft. So just another explanation. I've had fun making this puller. It worked out really well. It did the job. I'll use it again on the other engine, and I suggest you get out to your shed and have some fun yourself.